My name is Bernadette Dean, and you spell it Bernadette, Dean, Dean. I'm Inuk. I'm originally from Coral Harbor. I've been living in Rankin Inlet, Nunavut, but going to art school in Ottawa. It's my story and many others' story. I think it's important that the stories of residential school survivors are heard and heard by many people and many Canadians, because there's so many untold stories that were quiet for so long. It's about survival and a death. There was a death involved in the story I heard. My late friend William Grubin told me a story of 3 young boys running away from Inuvik Stringer Hall to Tuktoyaktuk. I don't know how far away that is, but it was in the winter time. And I think 1 or 2 perished. I don't know how old the boys were. I can't remember the age. But they were young boys trying to get away from residential school and returning home. Like, this is in the Arctic, in the winter. And I think 1 survived. I can't really remember all the details. This story took place in, I believe, the 1970s. Yeah. The residential school, I think, was Stringer Hall. There was 2 of them. Stringer Hall was Anglican and Grolier Hall was Catholic, and they were both in Inuvik, Northwest Territories. Yes, it involved students, and I cannot remember their names. They were told to me. I never attended Stringer Hall. I don't know if other students were involved. It was told to me by one of the fellow students, late William Grubin, told me. I attended residential school, Acacia Hall, for 3 years. No, I only attended Acacia Hall in Yellowknife.
Okay, so that was 2 questions for a couple.
I'm here to share some of my story, my experiences going to residential school. I think it was almost 1,000 miles away from home where I attended residential school. We grew up in, the community I grew up in, Coral Harbor, was maybe 99.9% Inuit, and going into school in Yellowknife, which was almost population of 10,000, and mostly white people, I think, and how much racism we experienced and how much labeling and negativity. We were judged before we were, when they didn't even know us, know who we were. We got labeled, and judged for when they didn't know who we were. Well, I remember being asked if I was Native, and I didn't even know what Native was because it was something we didn't hear every day in our community. And one of my friends and I, we wanted to get part-time jobs. We went to a hamburger joint to apply for a part-time job. And when she saw that our address was Acacia Hall, she ripped up the application form in front of us and said, "We don't hire anybody from there because we steal, and we don't even steal," like she didn't know who we were. So little things like that, that you were put aside because you from Acacia Hall. I think I was confused, but I quickly learned that we were different and treated differently, and you just had to learn to accept that. And we knew where we could walk, and we knew where we weren't allowed to walk. We just accepted it. This is my story, and first of all, my parents didn't understand English at all. They lived in the land for, I'm number 10 of 11 children they had, and most of their children were born out on the land. I was the second child of my mom born in a white man's hospital. And when she had given birth to my older siblings out on the land in our own way, she told me that when she was in labor with me at the hospital, she knew, like, she was more accustomed to being on her knees during childbirth. They would push her on the bed when she was in labor with me. I think that was trauma I experienced even at childbirth. Even before I was born, I could feel like I'm a believer. We experience everything our mothers experienced. So, and then my mom told me I was a big baby, fat baby, but I got medevac without my parents, without my mom, without my dad. That's the way it was. And she said I was so fat, it was like I had strings tied on my joints. And then she said when I came back from the hospital, I have a record of it, by the way. I was returned home March 1964. I would have been maybe 9 months old when I returned. She said I came home skinny. And so I was already broken and traumatized by the system, the government system or white man system. And I, growing up number 10 of 11 children, I had 3 older sisters that when the time came, they would leave home. They all left. We had a chance to be the eldest in our home. I thought it was normal that when you reach a certain age or complete a certain grade, you go away. I I thought that was normal. And our parents were intimidated by white people in the government. They had no voice. It was not normal. And what really hurt me was my dad was still alive when the compensation for common experience payment came out. I was really torn. So I told my dad that me and my younger brother and my siblings can get compensation for attending residential school. My dad started crying. He started crying because we had to be so far away from mom and dad when we were so young. And mom would cry herself to sleep, especially when my little brother went, her baby. And I know she's not the only mom that cried herself to sleep. There was some, that 4-year-old, I know one of my cousins was 4 years old when she went to residential school. 4 years old. I don't know what my story is, but it was so wrong and it was not normal. And it left so many broken. I was numb for many years. I was numb for many years. I didn't know I was numb, but it was a way to survive the trauma or try and forget it. And even to this day, there's so many. We got out of residential school and we had no sense of belonging. No sense. I didn't know that we were rejected by our own community sometimes. And a lot of residential school survivors have that no sense of belonging in them. And it's a terrible thing when you feel like you don't belong anywhere. And I belong in Canada, and I believe in the 94 calls to action. Like, I'll be fighting for those 94 calls to action till the day I die. And I don't know what else to say. I think our natural reaction to trauma is to run away. And I know that I have attachment and detachment issues with my own children, with myself, and with, like, my siblings and I were not close. Well, I'm close with my older brothers and my little brother, but the sisters were not close. And I think, I remember the first night in Acacia Hall, I remember crying quietly because I was missing my mom. And I was so far away. But I remember crying myself to sleep too. And just crying quietly. You learn to be quiet. Being silent is oppression. And whatever happened, I think the way to what it did to me and my sisters was we learned to detach. And I don't know if I'm making sense, but there's no attachment, or I have issues with attachment and detachment, I think. And that plays a role in my family life. I've been going to counseling for over 3 years, and in my therapy or in my journey, I had memories of, like I mentioned, I grew up in a community where they would hunt our foods, fishing, seals, caribou, walrus, polar bear. And in Acacia Hall, when I just couldn't eat another Swiss steak or chicken a la king, or I just had no appetite for white man's food. There would be times I didn't know I was probably craving our traditional foods. There were times where I would just have lettuce, add oil and salt, and that's what I ate because I just had no appetite for chicken a la king or Swiss steak, or sometimes I would just have a bowl of rice with lots of butter and soy sauce. And I think I didn't know then, I was probably craving our traditional foods. I'm not aware of any investigations. There was a lot of atrocious things I witnessed, right? I remember the boys had one of the younger boys tied up naked on a bed and brought out into the compound, and everyone laughing, and I was appalled. I felt so bad for that boy. That was bullying, and there was no name for bullying then, but lots of terrible stuff like that happened. I remember after study hour, we would hang out in the rec hall downstairs, and it was mixed, like boys and girls could hang out at the rec hall. I remember one boy held me down, and like two boys were holding me down, and one of them just giving me hickeys all over. When I think back, that was so scary to be pinned down, and then having to go to class the next day with all these hickeys. Yeah. No, I never, and people just, I don't know, it seemed to be accepted back then, but it was all part of the, I don't know, it was all part of the, it was accepted, it seemed, and you just deal with it or not deal with it by not dealing with it. I'm just grateful the stories are being told, and because there's so many levels of trauma and how it impacts us emotionally, mentally, spiritually, that only when you tell your story you bring it to light, and I'm grateful stories are being told. I remember one of my cousins in a panic mode because one of her grandchildren had been learning about residential schools, and he asked her if she had attended residential school, and she had, but she couldn't. She had a lump in her throat and couldn't talk because she didn't want to go there. And we try and protect our children from the pain and the shame, but not realizing that they are impacted too. And I remember the first time I went home, because there were no vehicles, there were no Hondas, and our airport was 11 miles away. I remember arriving on the DC-3 because there was no regular scheduled flights between our region and Yellowknife, so we would be on this big old DC-3 plane, 12 hours of flying, I think, 6 hours from Yellowknife to Baker Lake, which was always the first stop, and then stopping in all the other communities. When we arrived, nobody was at the airport, and it was dark, it was night. I started crying. I was sad and happy. I don't know. I just cried. All of us cried. We were happy to be home, and yet the people we wanted to see were not at the airport because there was no communication. No one told them that, the DC-3 bringing your kids is arriving at 7 o'clock or whatever. So the Department of Transportation guy, they were the only ones with vehicles, drove us into town. I remember one time when we were flying home, I don't know which of the years, DC-3 again, we kept circling Baker Lake for about an hour. We were just circling it. We could see it, but we weren't landing. And then one of the pilots came. He pulled the rug from, the aisle. He pulled the rug. he took this tool and he was cranking the wheels down. And here we were, 40, 50 teenagers on this plane, and we were all curious, like we weren't scared because it was so cold. The wheels, the tires wouldn't go down, so we had to manually crank it. That memory, I was like, we were so young and naive that we were in danger but didn't even know we were in danger. And after many years I thought, oh my God, the horror. So, yeah. We all have to play our part in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action. We all have that responsibility as Canadians to implement those and to the 94 calls to action. Because we belong to Canada and we're all Canadians, and we owe it to the future generations to make a difference. And those 94 calls to action can create positive change and difference for the future generations.